as hundreds of farmers from not only northeast Arkansas, but from across the state came to voice their concerns about the current state of farming. Representatives from U.S. Congressman Rick Crawford, U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, and U.S. Senator John Boozman's offices were in attendance to hear those concerns. Among those farmers in attendance was a farmer in Woodruff County, Chris King. He told me this was his 39th harvest, and he has never seen it as bad as this.
And I've never been as worried as I am now about whether or not my kids and grandkids will be able to carry on.
For King, the main problem starts with the fact that they can't sell for profit.
Delighted to announce this afternoon that the United States will be taking a small portion of the hundreds of billions of dollars we receive in tariffs. We are making a lot of money from countries that took advantage of us for years. They took advantage of us like nobody's ever seen. Our deficits are way down because of tariffs. I guess because of the election, because without the election you wouldn't have tariffs. You'd be sitting here losing your shirt. But we're taking in billions. We're really taking in trillions of dollars, if you think about it, Scott, because the real number is, when you think of all the money being poured into the country for new auto plants and all of the other things, AI. So what we're doing is we're taking a relatively small portion of that, and we're going to be giving and providing it to the farmers in economic assistance, and we love our farmers. And
American farmers are watching their livelihoods slip away, and there's nothing they can do. Africa, one of the biggest markets for U.S. agriculture, is still refusing to buy. Billions of dollars in crops are piling up, rotting in warehouses. While farmers plead with Washington for help, families who have farmed for generations are now on the brink. Grain silos full, trucks parked idle, and the harvest going to waste. Why is Africa turning its back on American agriculture? And what does this mean for the global food market, U.S. prices, and the farmers struggling to survive? The clock is ticking and the pressure is mounting. Stay tuned, because this story isn't just about crops, it's about survival, billions of dollars, and a brewing international clash. The fields of the American Midwest stretch for miles, golden waves of wheat and corn under the bright sun. Tractors stand idle, their engines silent, silos are full to the brim, yet the farmers who poured their lives into planting, nurturing, and harvesting these crops are now staring at disaster. Billions of dollars worth of American agriculture are sitting unsold, and the world's eyes are turning elsewhere. Africa, a continent once seen as a promising market for U.S. exports, is refusing to buy. For generations, American farmers have relied on overseas markets to survive. The thought that their crops might go to waste is unthinkable. But now those markets are shifting, and Africa is no longer buying what they produce. Soybeans, corn, wheat, and dairy products, goods that were once staples of U.S. exports, are being turned away, leaving families and entire communities on the brink of collapse. In small towns across Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, the impact is immediate and devastating. Farmers pace in their barns, staring at mountains of produce that have nowhere to go. Trucks that were supposed to transport goods to ports now sit abandoned, waiting for orders that never come. Grain elevators, normally bustling with activity, are silent. Farmers who have dedicated their lives to feeding the world are pleading with the government for solutions. They are asking Washington to step in, to negotiate deals, to find new buyers, but answers are slow and the pressure is mounting. Behind the numbers and trade statistics are human stories. Families who have farmed for generations are facing decisions no one should ever have to make. Should they let their crops rot? Should they take out more loans, risking their homes and livelihoods? The emotional toll is heavy, with sleepless nights, endless worry, and the constant question of how to survive the coming months. These aren't just farmers. These are families, communities, and lives on the line. The question of why Africa is refusing American agriculture is complex, rooted in economics, politics, and shifting alliances. Local African producers are gaining strength, producing more of their own food and reducing dependence on imports. Some governments are prioritizing local farmers, aiming to protect their economies from foreign dominance. Trade policies, tariffs, and new agricultural initiatives across Africa have created an environment where U.S. exports struggle to compete. Meanwhile, American policymakers are scrambling to understand how billions in potential revenue are slipping through their fingers. The stakes extend far beyond farm gates and silos. This is a story about global influence, economic power, and geopolitical tension. America, once dominant in global agriculture, is facing competition not just from local African producers but also from other international players willing to step in where Washington cannot. China, for example, has been investing heavily in African infrastructure, technology, and agriculture, creating new avenues for trade that bypass the U.S. entirely. The result is a dramatic shift in global food supply chains, and American farmers are feeling the consequences firsthand. It's easy to talk about numbers, billions lost, tons of crops unsold, but it's harder to talk about the people behind those figures. John Miller, a wheat farmer in Kansas, spent months preparing for the harvest, taking out loans to cover seed, equipment, and labor. When Africa rejected his shipment, he was left with no buyer and mounting debt. "I don't know how we're going to make it," he says, his voice heavy with worry. "We've worked our whole lives for this, and now it feels like everything we built is slipping away." Meanwhile, across the Midwest, the ripple effects are spreading. Local businesses that supply farmers, feed stores, machinery shops, and transport companies are seeing a slowdown. Communities that depend on the success of their local agriculture are starting to feel the strain. It's a chain reaction, one that threatens not just farmers but entire towns and local economies. The political angle adds another layer of tension. Washington is under pressure from multiple sides. Lobbyists, farmer associations, and local politicians are calling for urgent action. Yet negotiating trade deals with African nations is not straightforward. Sovereign countries are asserting their independence, making choices that serve their populations first. And as the U.S. government debates its next move, farmers are left in limbo, unsure if relief will come in time to save the season. Economic experts warn that this isn't just a temporary setback. If the trend continues, American agriculture could lose its competitive edge globally. Africa, with its growing population and expanding markets, represents a long-term opportunity, but one that might be slipping away. U.S. farmers who have long relied on these exports face a future where they must either innovate, adapt, or risk collapse. The human stories continue to pile up. Families selling off equipment, communities organizing fundraisers to help struggling farmers, and neighbors coming together to support one another. Yet the uncertainty lingers and the anxiety is palpable. The emotional weight of seeing a lifetime of work potentially wasted is crushing. Farmers describe it as watching your dreams rot before your eyes, a mixture of anger, sadness, and helplessness. Across the ocean, African countries are forging their own paths. Local farmers are thriving with government support, new infrastructure is improving logistics, and regional trade agreements are reshaping markets. For the African consumer, this means more locally produced food, lower prices, and greater self-sufficiency for U.S. exporters. It's a stark reminder that global influence cannot be taken for granted. The tension is not just economic. It is emotional and political. American farmers feel betrayed, abandoned by the very systems that promise support. African governments are asserting independence, creating friction that could have long-term implications for diplomacy and trade. And in the middle, billions of dollars in agriculture exports are in jeopardy. For those watching the fields, the silence is deafening. Every unsold bushel represents not just lost money, but lost hope. Communities are bracing for tough months ahead, and many are wondering if the U.S. government can intervene in time. The question hangs heavy in the air. What will it take to restore faith, secure markets, and save American agriculture from a crisis that is already unfolding? This story is far from over. The harvest continues, and with each passing day, the stakes grow higher. Farmers are not just fighting for crops. They are fighting for their livelihoods, their families, and their communities. And the world is watching, waiting to see whether America can reclaim its place in the global food market or whether billions in lost exports will mark the beginning of a new chapter, one where the balance of power in agriculture is shifting and U.S. farmers are forced to adapt to a world that is changing faster than they ever imagined. Across the heartland of America, the frustration is mounting. Meetings with local government officials yield little reassurance, and trade experts warn that the longer the standoff continues, the harder it will be to recover lost ground. For farmers, this is not just a matter of money, it's a matter of survival. Generations of knowledge, hard work, and tradition hang in the balance. Crops that have been meticulously planted, tended, and harvested now risk rotting in the fields or warehouses, a tangible symbol of a crisis that no one seems to know how to solve. The emotional strain on farmers is palpable. Many speak of sleepless nights, staring at spreadsheets that chart debt accumulating alongside unsold crops. Families once confident in their futures are now haunted by the uncertainty of whether their businesses can withstand another season. Farmhouses, usually bustling with activity during harvest, sit in an eerie stillness, as if the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for some solution that may never come. In Iowa, Sarah Thompson, a third-generation corn farmer, describes the anxiety with stark clarity. "We've worked these fields since I was a child," she says, standing among rows of corn taller than herself. "This isn't just about money. This is our life, our legacy. And now, with Africa refusing our crops, it feels like everything we've built is slipping through our fingers." Her voice trembles, a mix of anger and despair, as she recounts the calls she has made to Washington, hoping for assistance, for intervention, for any sign that the government understands the urgency of the situation. It is not only crops at stake. The broader economic impact is spreading like ripples across ponds of glass. Machinery suppliers, transportation companies, and processing facilities are all feeling the strain. Local banks, which traditionally have relied on the agricultural sector for business, are tightening loans, worried about defaults. That might come from a widespread inability to sell crops. Even small towns, which often rely on seasonal farm labor and the economic activity surrounding harvest time, are bracing for the consequences. It is a crisis that touches everyone, and yet it feels intangible because the losses are not just immediate, they are strategic, long-term, and systemic. Trade experts warn that the situation is more than just a temporary disruption. U.S. agricultural dominance has been taken for granted for decades, but the global market is evolving. African nations, increasingly self-sufficient in food production, are investing heavily in local agriculture. Government policies now favor homegrown goods, with subsidies and incentives for domestic farmers. These initiatives are transforming the African agricultural landscape, creating a competitive market where American imports are no longer guaranteed. The role of international competitors cannot be overlooked. China, in particular, has been proactive in establishing trade relationships and investing in African infrastructure, providing loans, technology, and expertise to local producers. This is a direct challenge to U.S. influence, and American farmers are caught in the middle, facing both local competition and the shifting tides of geopolitics. It is not merely a matter of crops, it is a question of influence, control, and who will shape the future of global agriculture. Meanwhile, the emotional toll continues to mount at the grassroots level. Farmers share stories of trucks loaded with crops that cannot leave warehouses, of produce being sold at a fraction of its value just to avoid total loss, and of families forced to make difficult financial decisions simply to keep their farms afloat. The stress is cumulative and unrelenting, manifesting in anxiety, strained relationships, and a deep-seated worry about the next generation. Many young farmers are questioning whether they want to continue the family legacy, given the uncertainty and risk now embedded in what once felt like a stable, predictable way of life. The story also highlights the complexities of trade diplomacy. Negotiations are ongoing, but African nations are firm in their stance. They are prioritizing their own food security and economic growth over foreign imports, a decision that carries both domestic and international implications. This is not an act of hostility toward the U.S. Rather, it is an assertion of sovereignty and a calculated strategy to strengthen local economies. For American policymakers, this represents a dilemma: how to respect the independence of African nations while protecting the livelihoods of millions of American farmers. In small towns across the Midwest, these geopolitical debates feel abstract. The human cost is immediate and personal. Farmers like John Miller are forced to make heart-wrenching decisions: to sell their crops at a loss, to take on more debt, or to risk losing their farms entirely. Communities rally together in support, but the strain is undeniable. Local churches organize fundraisers, neighbors share resources, and families lean on each other for emotional and financial support. Yet even these acts of solidarity cannot fully mitigate the weight of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the media has begun to spotlight the crisis. Headlines highlight the billions in lost exports, the struggles of family farmers, and the growing tension between U.S. economic interests and African sovereignty. The story is gaining traction internationally, prompting debate and analysis about the shifting balance of power in global agriculture. Commentators question whether the U.S. is losing its competitive edge, whether domestic policies are adequate, and what steps Washington must take to restore confidence and access to international markets. The emotional resonance of this crisis is amplified when personal stories come to light. Farmers recount the pride of watching their crops grow, the joy of harvest, and the sense of purpose derived from feeding communities both domestically and abroad. The current impasse feels like a betrayal of that purpose, a cruel twist in a narrative built on hard work, resilience, and dedication. It is a reminder that global economic shifts are not abstract. They are felt in the hearts and homes of ordinary people whose lives are intertwined with the land. As the days turn in 2 weeks, pressure mounts on both sides. African nations continue to focus on local development, while American farmers grow increasingly desperate. Washington faces intense lobbying, calls for policy intervention, and mounting public scrutiny. The stakes are immense. Billions of dollars are at risk, family legacies hang in the balance, and the global food supply chain is undergoing a transformation that could have lasting consequences. The situation serves as a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of the modern world. What happens in small towns in Kansas, Iowa, and Nebraska does not remain isolated. It resonates across continents, influencing markets, trade policies, and diplomatic relationships. American agriculture, once seen as a cornerstone of global stability and economic influence, now faces challenges that test its resilience, adaptability, and strategic foresight. Amid this crisis, hope is not entirely lost. Some farmers are exploring alternative markets, diversifying their crops, and investing in technology to improve efficiency and competitiveness. Government agencies are engaging in discussions with African trade officials, seeking opportunities to reopen negotiations and forge partnerships that benefit both parties. Communities are showing resilience, demonstrating that even in the face of immense economic and emotional pressure, human determination and ingenuity persist. Yet the reality remains stark. Billions of dollars in American agriculture are still unsold, and the pressure continues to mount. Families continue to navigate a landscape of uncertainty, with every decision carrying the weight of potential loss or survival. The emotional, financial, and strategic stakes are higher than ever, and the world is watching to see how the crisis will unfold. The sun sets over the vast fields of the Midwest, casting long shadows across the golden wheat and corn. The tractors stand silent, their engines cooled, waiting for a future that feels uncertain. Farmers walk slowly through their lands, hands brushing against the crops they've nurtured from seed to harvest, their faces a mixture of pride, worry, and exhaustion. Each stalk of wheat tells a story of sweat, sacrifice, and hope, but now that hope feels fragile, like it could be swept away by forces beyond their control. Families sit around kitchen tables, poring over bills and loan statements, trying to find a way forward. The laughter that once filled farmhouses during harvest season is quieter now, replaced by hushed conversations about what comes next. Children who once dreamed of following in their parents' footsteps are beginning to question whether that dream is worth the struggle. The very legacy of generations of farming hangs in the balance, teetering on the edge of uncertainty. It is in these moments, the quiet moments, that the human cost becomes undeniable. This isn't just about crops or dollars, it's about lives, families, and communities. It's about farmers who have given everything to feed a nation and the world, now staring at the reality that markets are shifting, allies are changing, and billions in potential income are slipping through their fingers. The heartbreak is real, the stress is real, and the stakes could not be higher. Across the ocean, African nations are building a future that prioritizes their own farmers, their own communities, and their own independence. For them, this is a story of growth and self-sufficiency. But for American farmers, it is a story of struggle, a reminder that the world is changing faster than many expected, and that survival requires adaptation, resilience, and sometimes a fight to reclaim lost ground. The emotional weight of this crisis cannot be overstated. Each unsold bushel, each idle truck, each empty grain silo is a reminder of the precariousness of life on the farm. It's a reality that families are forced to face every day, a challenge that tests not just their financial stability but their courage, their perseverance, and their belief in the value of what they do. Farmers are not giving up, but they are deeply aware that time is not on their side. And yet, in the midst of despair, there is resilience. Communities rally together, neighbors help neighbors, and families dig deep to find strength they didn't know they had. Stories emerge of innovative solutions, alternative markets, and local initiatives. Aimed at keeping farms alive, there is hope and determination and courage in the refusal to give up. Even as billion-dollar exports hang in the balance, the human spirit persists, reminding us all why these farms matter not just as economic engines, but as the heart of American communities. For policymakers in Washington, the message is clear. This is more than a trade issue. It is a moral and social responsibility to protect the livelihoods of those who feed the nation. Urgent action is needed, but it must be thoughtful, strategic, and respectful of the global landscape. The choices made now will not only affect the current generation of farmers, but generations to come. The question is whether decisive leadership can rise to meet the challenge before the window of opportunity closes. As night falls over the heartland, the fields remain quiet, yet full of potential. Every stalk of wheat and corn carries the weight of hope, the promise of tomorrow, and the resilience of the human spirit. Farmers walk home, weary but determined, knowing that the battle is far from over. Their fight is not just for profits, but for survival, for dignity, and for the continuation of a way of life that has endured for centuries. This is the reality of America's farmers today, caught in a global struggle, facing challenges that are bigger than themselves, yet refusing to surrender. Africa's refusal to buy U.S. agriculture is not the end of the story. It is a chapter in a larger narrative of resilience, adaptation, and determination. The world is watching, the markets are shifting, and the question remains: will American farmers find a way to reclaim their place on the global stage, or will billions in lost crops define the future of this vital industry? In the end, it is not just a story about agriculture. It is a story about people, families, communities, and the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be defeated. It is about the heartbreak of loss, the courage to keep going, and the hope that tomorrow may yet bring a solution. And as the stars emerge over the quiet fields, one thing is clear: the fight is far from over. And the legacy of America's farmers will continue, no matter the obstacles, no matter the odds, and no matter how uncertain the world may seem.